Hello and welcome to another edition of The Tigers Down Under. We've had a pretty eventful week, 2 games to talk about, a couple of transfer signings that might be getting signed in the next day or two, hopefully, as well as a game to look forward to in the Premier League on the weekend. And to go through it all, I've got Logan.
Hello.
And I've also got Brad.
Hello.
We'll start with the weekend's game, which is the more optimistic result, which was the 2-0 win over Swansea. Marco Silva's first game in charge, and it was a great start to get off to with a victory. Brad, what did you make of the game?
It pretty much had everything I think we thought it would have. I think most of us were pretty confident that we could actually win it, even if we were to mix the side up a little bit. I suppose probably the surprise, or not surprise, but the fact that Hernandez got on the score sheet early was very handy, and probably set the tempo a little bit. And probably the most exciting thing was, even though it was not a league game, the fact that we kept a clean sheet is pretty positive too.
And obviously Josh Tymon getting on the score sheet for his first senior goal was pretty impressive to see. What did you make of it, Logan?
Yeah, exactly. I think if you, from a City's perspective, you probably could walk in if you wanted to pick two scorers. Hernandez and Tymon probably would have been right up there with the first two names that you'd want to score. Just for Tymon's confidence, obviously, being a young lad and getting the call up. And probably he might not have assumed that he was going to get a role, obviously, with Silva being new to the job. Nothing was for certain, and I think he might have been somewhat surprised to have got the tap on the shoulder to come on, and then he obviously took his chance beautifully.
And I guess the interesting thing especially is, as you say, Silva might not have known a whole lot about Tymon, so might not have had a lot of faith in him. But not only did he bring him on, but I'm pretty sure he threw him on at left mid, which is why he was so far forward to take that shot.
Yeah, exactly. And you just saw when he was given the opportunity, I thought the easy play was to probably go looking for his striker, but the fact that he had the presence of mind to take the defender on, and then obviously it was a very tidy finish. Really, really promising sign from such a young player. And obviously being a homegrown product makes it all the more special.
Brad, there was about 5,000 in attendance at the game. I think the official attendance was 6,000, but speculation is it's closer to the 5,000 mark. It's a tough one because on one hand you want to say that means the boycott was successful, but on the other hand it's quite sad to think that a measure of success is how low the crowd was. Did that impact on your enjoyment of the game, or did it sort of, how did it make you feel seeing that crowd attendance?
Seeing the images early, pretty much two empty stands, wasn't a great look. But look, I've been sitting on the fence with it since, obviously we're a long way away. Whilst we like to live and breathe City, there's only so much living and breathing you can do from the other side of the world. But I think that it probably had the desired effect. It was just the fact that we all would have loved the fact that it didn't coincide with Silva's first game. That's probably the only sad thing. But the thing that's been refreshing since then is to hear him in the media making comment that, that he understands, and, he's not exactly saying, look, by the way, I rocked up and was pretty disappointed the fans didn't turn up. He says, I can sort of understand why. And I like that. And it's not for us to say whether there should be a boycott or not, but I think it got a bit more media than it would have if it didn't happen. But I just think the Allens are not going to change. And that sort of goes on to what even Mike Phelan alluded to after the game this morning, was that, unless the investment comes, there's no chance, and it doesn't look like the Allens are going to do much about that.
Logan, as Brad's touched on there, it did get quite a bit of a media attention on the game. It's interesting though, some of the media outlets seem to be just reporting it in amongst a bunch of other games between Premier League sides that had notably lower crowds. Do you think the boycott basically served its purpose, that it achieved its aim?
I'm not sure that it did. I think that there will probably be pockets of supporters that will feel that it's gone a long way to kind of, giving them the assurance that they need that they achieved something out of it. But like you said, there were still 5,000 people did turn up, and it sounded like a pretty impressive crowd for the amount that were in attendance. So look, I'm not sure. I think that they probably would have liked to have seen even less from the boycott perspective if they really wanted to plug the Allams. But obviously, 5,000 people to a Premier League fixture, well, 2 Premier League side fixtures, very disappointing from their perspective. And look, if the Allams aren't sure that the fans are disgruntled or not happy with them, well, they're living under a rock. It's impossible for that to have been the case. So I don't really know if the boycott did serve its purpose.
Yeah, and I mean, as a direct comparison, we played Swansea in the League Cup last season, and I don't know the exact figure off the top of my head, but I think there was about 10,000 extra fans in attendance for that game when we weren't even in the Premier League at the time. On to more positive news then, and as we've kind of touched on the fact that the Allams need to invest a bit of money if we are to stay up, we've had a bit of transfer news in the last few days, which seems to be much more fact than fiction, at least hopefully in the sense of one of the players, Omar Delaui, if I'm pronouncing that name correctly, is a Norwegian right back who we've been linked to for probably about a week now, or ever since Silva came into the club, as a right back that was playing at Olympiacos under Silva. He was actually a youth player at Man City as well, so he has a bit of experience in the country and might be able to settle quite quickly if some reports are to be believed that we're closing in on him. And the other one is Umar Niasse from Everton on loan for the season, who pretty spectacularly failed at Everton, or didn't fail to live up to expectation at Everton after about 100 minutes of football, finding himself in the under-23s without even a permanent locker at the club. So on the face of it, it'd be a pretty underwhelming one if we sign him, but he's pretty young, he'd be hungry, he'd have a point to prove. Brad, what would you make of it if we could secure those 2 additions?
Look, not knowing a lot about him, we need a striker. So obviously the lad from Everton's, he scored goals, not so much in the Premier League, but he scored them in the past, and it's got to be worth a try, especially as we saw this morning, not so much even from a striker perspective, but we just don't have the coverage in a lot of positions, not just one or 2. So anyone that's going to be up to Silva's standards, let's hope, and adds another number to that squad, is going to be good. Certainly the right back side of things is probably more of an issue from a coverage perspective, because at times you can change your formation up the top, but not having a right back has been a problem at times, or even again just pointing back to the fact there's just no coverage in that pay. If Elmo goes down, as we saw this morning, we're makeshifting all the time with that position. So you would hope that Silva's got a pretty talented group of scouts, or the club has, and that he's tapping into that and utilising it the way you'd expect him to.
Logan, if by this time tomorrow we had locked in both of those players on contracts, would you be happy with those additions for the next week or 2, or even for the rest of the season? Or do you think we'll need a couple more additions if we're going to see out the season?
Look, I think that we certainly need to add to the squad even more, regardless of if those 2 were to sign. Look, the contentious one, I think, is the Everton boy, just in the sense that he obviously came with a relatively large price tag for Everton, so they must have seen something in him to begin with. So, look, he comes with promise despite not having the Premier League return, although some would argue that he hasn't really had the opportunity. So, look, he's somewhat unproven. I think another unproven striker at this stage isn't going to do too much to our cause. Obviously, the other lad that Silva knows quite well, he's brought him in with purpose, and obviously having worked with him, he would know what to expect from him. So I'm more confident with the right back than I would be with the Everton boy. But I think that those 2 certainly would be helpful additions, but at this stage, not enough.
One that I would have been interested in trying to pursue, and obviously I don't know if the club did try to pursue it, when people say, after being linked to Niasse, well, who else could we have gotten? One I would have liked to try and get would have been Janssen from Spurs, if for no other reason than he played with Henriksen last season at AZ Alkmaar. And I feel like both Henriksen and Janssen have really struggled to settle in the Premier League, but obviously had a great goals and assists return between them last year at the club at AZ Alkmaar. I almost wonder if we'd given it a go to try and get Janssen in, on loan for the rest of the season. Sell it to Spurs is basically, well, he's going to play most weeks, so he'll get that experience in the Premier League. He'll be playing with a player that he's familiar with, and that might actually help them both in the long term.
That's an interesting one, and I certainly agree that any kind of combinations that you can add, particularly for a relegation fight, if they're proven to have the chemistry of working together, well, it might not be such a bad shout. But if we're going to go investing in the kind of money that we're talking, if of course this Nias deal is to come off and we take out the long option, I think it might be £10 million that we've agreed to. If I'm thinking for that kind of money, obviously we can sit back and look at the opportunities, but for that price last year, although granted we were still in the championship, we could have pulled Andre Gray for that. And if there was a choice between having Andre Gray and Nias at the club, well, I think I'd be probably more convinced if we had Gray's name to the paper.
It's a funny one because it's a 10 million option to buy if we stay up, and one sense that I try and look at it as is, well, if we're in a position where we're complaining that we're spending 10 million on him, it means we've stayed up, and there's a very good chance that means that his goals have helped us to stay up. So to that extent, you could kind of hope that we do end up having to pay the 10 million for him, but as you say, for 10 million, there's plenty of other players that I reckon we could have gone for. For instance, the Sombalonga, I think Forest would be happy with 10 million for him. I'm sure there's a few other strikers in the championship as well who you could look at for that sort of money and probably get a more guaranteed sort of goal return, if not double figures, at least, half a dozen to 10 goals a season, rather than Nias, who could really do nothing or everything.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that when you start to kind of look at the options out there, it does make you wonder, where are these players that we've had the opportunity to purchase in the past? You even think back to Charlie Austin when he failed the £5 million medical. And it really, it's a reflection on some of the huge opportunities that players that we could certainly do with right now that do fit into our price range.
Absolutely. Well, we'll move on to the other game from the last week, and it was just this morning, Australian time, last night in the UK. United at home to Hull City. And I think we might have set history in this game for having more ex-managers in the ground than fit centre-backs in our squad. Steve Bruce watching from the director's box with son Alex, who's still out injured, even though I'm not entirely sure when he's meant to be returning to action for us. And Mike Phelan taking on the rather unenviable job of sitting in the press box dissecting a game that only a week ago he was lining up to manage. I'll start with you, Logan. At half-time at 0-0, obviously things were looking pretty good for us and we were starting to think quite positively about it. But do you think with the tie ending 2-0 to United that it's an incredibly uphill battle from here?
Yeah, it was an interesting one. I thought that it was the same old story of a really positive performance, but at the same time, not the result that we were kind of hoping for. And I still kind of got the impression that, I think Brad mentioned in the last podcast actually, that if we were to get one goal, we would have been a huge chance of taking the game back to the KCOM and kind of causing that upset. But when Fellaini scored the late goal and really kind of put us to bed, I think that if we're perfectly honest, it was a very big task to be able to put 3 goals over and turn United over in a couple of weeks. To me, it seems very unlikely, but possible.
Everything's possible at the end of the day, but yeah, it would certainly be an uphill challenge from there, I think. And obviously, Henriksen and Timon both went off injured in the game. We touched on Timon scoring his first goal against Swansea, so it's been a mixed emotions for the last couple of days for him, I would suspect. We only named 6 subs on the bench, and is that a concern, Brad? Well, obviously it's a concern, but what do you make of the fact that we're getting to a point where we can't even field a competitive 11?
Look, I think it just gets back to, game 1 of the season. The squad's always been too small. I think we're talking about having 13 first-team players in that very first game, and even if you've added 5 or 6, you're still looking at a first-team squad of 19. When if you look around, barring, say, the top 4 or 5 richest clubs, most of those clubs are running around with squads of sort of upwards of 25 to 30. And then to have another hopefully not serious injury, but maybe 2 from this morning's game or last night's game. That's the real concern. We talk about bringing players in at the moment. If you say we bring 4 players in, we're probably still about 4 short.
And Logan, what was your thoughts on, I guess, the injuries to the 2 players and also just the general style of play in the game?
Well, I think the other thing that we've got to remember as well is, like, Hernandez came on, obviously made that sub later on in the game, and we still aren't really sure about his level of fitness in itself. So although we were carrying a kind of undermanned bench, some of the players that we've actually got playing at the moment are somewhat nursing injuries on the back of kind of long stints out. I even think of people like Sean Maloney, who really hasn't played much football at all. And for him to kind of get thrown in as well, it kind of shows, echoing what Brad said, is just how short we are. We probably are 4 or 5 players short in the depth sense, that we aren't really making substitutions to cause teams problems. We're making substitutions to kind of survive. And I thought that the longer that game went on against United, we weren't really going to nick anything from it. We weren't looking to score a late goal. It was pretty much get through the minutes and survive, and I think that really kind of sums up everything that's wrong with Hull City at the moment.
And I was just quite grateful that Maguire pulled up fit to actually start the game, because the way we were going, we weren't going to have any fit centre-backs, and then obviously Jake was ill the morning of the game, and I like to think that when Jake realised he was going to be ill and miss the game, that he went over and sneezed on Ibra, because Ibra missed the game with illness as well. But probably one of the highlights of the game for me, if we're going to talk about these centre-backs, is Harry Maguire's run, where he ran about 50 yards, went past 4 United players, megged Phil Jones and actually got a shot away, and a couple of tweets coming through kind of just saying, is this real life? Has this really happened? Because it was a phenomenal piece of play, and we've been talking about him all season, having great control at feet with the ball, taking the ball into the opposition half and really causing threats, and Maguire just put on a show on one of the biggest grounds in England.
Yeah, I think the first thing that I'd like to do is apologise to Big Harry for when I got asked who I thought my player of the match was in the Everton game. I kind of somehow missed him. I thought he was monumental, and I somewhat wasn't too surprised to see the effort that he put in against United, because we've started to become accustomed to that's exactly what we can expect from Harry in a game. He doesn't mind popping up in those unusual positions, and he certainly, in his head, he's very confident and backs himself kind of against anybody. So it's great to watch, and it would have been extremely surprising for many of the United fans in the stands.
So just rounding up from the 2 games, I'll ask you, Brad, first of all, who stood out for you probably as the top 2 or 3 players over the course of the 2 games?
Look, I was pretty impressed with Huddleston's performance last night, and there's probably 2 or 3 of those guys that have been in or around since the first game of the season that just showed that they are a little bit adaptable. They're there for the team, and probably, whilst I thought we could have probably done with a bit more attacking presence at time, I did think Clucas was good again. And really did put a real stint in. So probably the thing that it pointed out to me was that all of the guys that played last night, even in their not suited roles, are the guys we want at the club. We just want to sprinkle that little bit more excitement and attacking flair and a couple of goals, and we're not far away. And the endeavour last night, and in the Swansea game, was really impressive. Probably good to see Robertson, doing what he does. But probably the one that stood out for me was definitely Maguire. We can probably assume that he's not 100% fit. He still backed himself, like we said, on the bigger stage in England. He backed himself to really take these players on. But at times he was instrumental in the way that defence held up, and I think Huddleston got a lot of plaudits for the way he played. But without Maguire there, Huddleston has a bad night. I can really see the fact that Maguire was really keeping it all together, and maybe Jakupovic was helping part of that as well. They looked quite solid. That was one really positive thing from the game last night.
Yeah, I haven't seen the stats, but I think Maguire would have made a fair few interceptions and tackles and clearances, as that seems to be the key stat defenders are judged on these days, as well as clean sheets. And he seemed to be breaking up a number of United attacks and blocking a lot of shots that United were trying to get in on Jakupovic, and really made Jakupovic's job a bit easier in terms of the shots he faced, because I think he only made 2 saves in the first half. And yeah, Maguire had a pretty outstanding game. Logan, from your perspective, who else stood out for you over the 2 games?
Yeah, I think certainly Harry Maguire that Brad's already touched on, but I've just been really impressed with Josh Tymon. Obviously, he went off, but it's such a breath of fresh air that in such a quite a difficult time, obviously with the situation at the club, to be able to put a 17-year-old in and kind of trust that he will do his job and do it well. I think that any kind of effort from him is something that we need to be kind of looking to praise it. It just sometimes I'm totally and utterly surprised at just the ability that he has for his age and the confidence that he plays with. Yeah.
Yeah, well, hopefully his injury isn't too serious and he'll be back on the pitch before too long. But we'll look ahead now to the Bournemouth game on the weekend, and it'll be Marco Silva's first game in the Premier League. So he's had a bit of taste of everything with FA Cup, followed by League Cup, followed by Premier League football. At home to Bournemouth, we can't do much worse than we did last time against them when we lost 6-1 at their place. Mason, the goal scorer for us. I'll start with you, Brad. What are your expectations from this game, especially with the games that we have following this one?
Well, I mean, statistically, it's a must-win. We know that. You need the 3 points, and looking at the months ahead, it's hard to see where any other points may actually come from. But probably the thing that's probably more so Bournemouth's position, I think they've dropped 2 of their last 3 or 2 out of the last 4 or something like that. So clearly they're going to be really up for it and trying to prove that they're not going to get knocked off by the bottom side. But we all know in the last month that the endeavour of our boys has been there. As long as we've got at least 11 fit players to start, I actually think we're a real chance against them. I think last time when we got pounded by them, you can name a whole number of things, but realistically, we probably believed a bit too much about where we were at, and there's a lot of tinkering going on, and it wasn't quite the ideal lineup, and all sorts of reasons why Bournemouth just had a day out and effectively put, I think, 8 shots on for 6 goals, which is almost unheard of. So I do think, though, this is really where Silva can actually put his stamp on how we're going to play and who he wants to pick, assuming everyone's fit, because they're the perfect opposition to get at this stage with their, say, last month's worth of form.
And it was probably also those bloody purple shirts or whatever it was called, the purple cactus or cactus purple or whatever it was called.
Oh, we've heard all sorts, haven't we? Pink, almost lilac, whatever it is. They're bloody horrible, and if we don't have to wear them again, we're quite happy. But yeah, I think it is a game that we shouldn't be thinking, oh yeah, we're bottom of the league and Bournemouth are halfway. It's going to be tough. I actually think we need to be thinking, do you know what, if we're going to have any chance of getting out of this scrap, we need to be thinking, not just knowing, but thinking that we are the better side this week.
It's going to be an interesting game as well because Ake has been recalled by Chelsea for Bournemouth, and along with Francis, who's out with a red card suspension, as well as Pugh, who's out injured. I'm not sure if either side could really name a fullback for at this stage, let alone one between them. Logan, do you see this game as a must-win? Do you see it as a game we can win? And do you think we will win it?
With the fixtures coming up, I think that it is a must-win. I obviously don't think that we need to go on an epic run and knock off the top 4, although it would be extremely nice. But given the time frame that we probably get our shot at Bournemouth, and then before we have some of those kind of 6-pointers in our grasp, I think that just mentally or psychologically we need to lift ourselves out of the 20th position. And really start to put a little bit more pressure on those teams around us. I feel if they were to collect a couple of wins in the next month, assuming that we have a tough run of things, I think that it might be, come the start of February, it might be a little bit of a bridge too far. So I think it's very important that we do win this one. I'm calling it a must-win. And then obviously we hope against the bigger teams that we can perform in in a way that keeps results a snare a draw every now and then, or perhaps a large upset. I think that at home we have to attack them, like Brad said, particularly with the defensive fragilities that you've mentioned. And I think we will win it. I think we'll win it 2-0. I think it's going to be one of those days where things kind of click for us. I think that the effort's been there. Mike Phelan, even in the post-match, he said the players aren't the problem. And I thought that was a really interesting comment coming from a manager who was sacked in the same week. So, I think it is a positive game, and I think we'll turn them over.
And I'll get a one-word answer from both of you because I think everyone's sick of it being an endless discussion with us. But I'll ask you first, Brad. Do you think Marshall will start the game?
No. I think... sorry, I know it's a one-word answer, but I just think Silva's one of these managers that really has a belief and momentum, and whether it's the European factor or not, he's really got this whole one unit, one approach thing. And I think it's pretty hard-pressed to see Yak and the way he reacted, especially after Tymon's goal in the FA Cup. That pretty much sealed it for me. The guy is not in it for himself. He just genuinely wants to be in a winning team and seeing people do well. And that breeds confidence and encouragement amongst other players.
And Logan?
No.
And then I'll finish off by getting a tip from both of you for the game. So I'll start with you, Brad.
I'm thinking 2-1 to City.
And I guess, Logan, you've already said 2-0, but do you want to hazard a guess at the goal scorers?
Yeah, it'll be Snodgrass and Hernandez.
Fair enough. Yeah, I have a feeling it might be 1-1, as the pessimist on the panel, I suppose. I guess I'm just a bit apprehensive given our form lately, and we seem to be putting the performances in but not getting the results. But hopefully we can start getting the results against Bournemouth. So thanks very much for coming on, boys.
No problem.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks everyone for listening in. If you enjoy the video, hit like on the YouTube video and share it around, and also leave us a comment. Thanks to the guy who gave us a comment last week asking if we'd ever been to Hull. We certainly have, and we absolutely loved it. Can't wait to get back. So until we're back, until the next week of the podcast, come on City. You've been listening to the official Hull City Australia podcast. For more discussion, join us on Facebook in the Hull City AFC Australian Supporters Group, or follow us on Twitter at Hull City AFC Oz. The music was created by Amber and Black.
There's no turning back 'cause you're Amber.